What's going on, Wildcatters? Welcome back to another episode of the Oil and Gas Stars podcast. We've got MiQ in the house. What's going on, George?
Great to be here.
I'm excited. You're in town for Sarah Week. We were able to snag you. I think we've been meaning to make this happen for quite some time, so thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. It's been my pleasure to get out of Sarah Week for this podcast as well.
We've got all the big wigs in town. Bill Gates was, he's been making his keynotes and rounds with Daniel Chergin, and who else is in town? There's a bunch of other people. We got all the executives from
all the
every energy
executives
company you can possibly imagine.
Totally, yeah.
I'm sure. Any other big Silicon Valley names you've seen?
Oh, that's a question. Well, Bill Gates, if that still counts, clearly.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I've seen big Silicon Valley names.
Did Granholm say anything crazy this week?
Nothing crazy.
Nothing
I think
crazy?
It was no. As far as I would analyze it, nothing crazy. I think. They're clearly taking things in the right direction. Well, I did notice as well there was another panel which I attended with close to 8 CEOs of the oil companies, of the Chevrons and the Exxons and the Petrobrasses under the banner of OGCI. And a vast part of that conversation was around methane. So that was quite good to see, because obviously that's what we're doing, trying to address methane. And it's great to see that the industry is now taking methane very seriously. So my first time at Sarah was last year, so that I can't say what it would have been 5 years ago, but I can imagine what it would have been in comparison to now talking about methane. So
it's the conversation has evolved very rapidly, and I think it's obviously you read sustainability reports, read earnings reports. It's obviously a high level bullet point for pretty much every company.
And I think there's a logic in it as well, and that's the point we've always been making as MiQ when we started this. It's not that. There is clearly an incentive to kind of deal with methane.
Tomato,
tomato. And I've noticed as I'm here more days, I start to flip around. So this will probably get worse at the end. Is that it can be addressed actually quite straightforward by the industry. It's existing technologies, existing methodologies, and it's a huge number that can be addressed. So I can also see a total logic for the industry to take up this challenge to address methane.
So on that, what is MiQ?
So good point. So MiQ stands for Methane IQ. So we're all about methane, and methane in oil and gas is the principal one. Reason being, as I was just alluding to, it's a huge number that's out there actually. And I had actually retired. I used to work in financial markets and trading markets. And then a former colleague of mine called me up and said, George, we need to look at methane. I went, you mean gas? No, the leaks from the gas during the production. And this was 2019, and we had some trouble finding good numbers. And then we tried to do what in banking terms is called, what's the size of this thing? What's the back of the envelope calculation? And we figured out, okay, because methane is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide when it's released. It's like, this is a huge number. And the conclusion is it is basically the equivalent. So all the leaks in oil and gas in the whole system globally is the equivalent of all the cars on the road globally. And it is 8 times all the full aviation sector. So I know there's a lot of attention around, okay, can we put hydrogen in planes? Can we do SAF in planes? Can we put batteries in planes? And huge amount of headlines on that. And as an engineer, super exciting to talk about these technologies. But I'm also coming from what's the impact? And so here we've got methane in oil and gas alone. Again, with existing technologies, we can address it. And the size of what we can address is 8 times the aviation sector. And so we've kind of created this goal that we think by 2030, we can address a big part of that. And that would be the equivalent of taking 1 billion cars off the roads. I'm sorry to say, but that's way more than what Elon Musk is going to achieve. So by then, and I'm not saying EVs over the long term is clearly going to have a huge impact as well, but the potential impact of methane is of solving that is enormous. So we've got to do this to buy ourselves time.
And that's really, really interesting. Do you know what the number is for the United States alone? Like, I'm trying to compare the United States versus global is a totally different question.
So a lot of this is based on imprecise numbers. Off top of my head, United States, where the production is going up as well, I don't know, probably in methane emissions, it's less than 20% of global, but it'd be in that kind of order of magnitude. I'd have to look it up clearly, but anywhere between 10 and 20%, because there are lots of other oil-producing, gas-producing nations. Yeah. But the United States, if I just look at gas production, what is it now? Almost 100 BCF a day. Global gas production is about 4 times that. And on oil, I don't think the market share is as large. So yeah, it'd be that kind of number. So yeah, if you look at the US alone, that potential is enormous. Yeah. And the interesting thing on the US as well, one can't these days look at each region in isolation anymore. And yesterday there was many discussions around this, because obviously the US exports gas and oil, but especially gas via LNG. And there's a lot of scrutiny abroad, especially Europe, but Japan I've had recently discussions with Japan and Korea on this, and they want to lower the methane emissions of the gas they're purchasing. So everything is connected these days. Why is it connected? Well, it's global climate change problems. So what happens in the United States influences Europe and vice versa. So we've approached this globally. So what we've set up with MiQ is to create that global transparency, that global system, so that the companies can act upon it.
Yeah. So your mission is to lower the methane emissions. How do you guys accomplish that? What's the mechanism?
Yeah, so the mechanism is called certification, but the driver is the theory of change, as one calls this, is that market forces are very efficient when correctly designed and when market forces work well. So the certification is the method underlying to create those market forces. And so what we're doing, we are certifying facilities or assets, different names, of operating companies. And they will be certified on their methane emissions. And we'll probably come to how that's done in the detail. But the way it works is they then get given a grade. And that's not different than an energy efficiency grade, for example, when one buys an appliance. And that grade, then the company now knows, and this is an independent certifier, i.e. MiQ, says, okay, so-and-so production facilities, an A grade or a B grade or a C grade, reflects the methane emissions. What then can happen, that company can now sell gas to their buyers with that information attached, because that's now been vetted, certified. The buyer, and coming back to market forces, the buyer can now make a choice. They can make a choice saying, I want certified gas, or I'm good with any gas. And there might be a price differential. Or they can say, I'd rather have the A grade because that's the number where I want to stop, and maybe I'll pay a bit more for this. And so what we're doing is giving the buyers a choice, just like you have in other parts, because what that will imply is that once you have that choice, you drive the change, because the buyers will say, I want to have up to a C grade, for example. That's what I'm buying. And currently, they didn't have the choice. Before certified gas arrived, they didn't have the choice. There is parallels to this in the electricity markets. In the US, there's a concept called RECs. So it's buying renewable electricity that works via certificates as well. So there's quite a lot of parallels with that. The buyers, such as, I don't know, Google, Microsoft, decide to buy all their electricity renewable. That's a choice they can make that drives the market towards more renewable electricity. So very similar here. This will drive the markets. The markets will drive the operators to lower their methane emissions.
I have so many questions. There's so many different directions we can go.
Oh, no.
Let's dive into your background. You know, I know you said that you were pretty much retired. You got sucked back in.
I did.
You're hard charging on this mission. Where did you spend your career? Did you come from energy? You come from finance?
Both, okay. Actually. Yes. So by training, I'm Dutch citizen, but I grew up in Europe and then ended up in London. Worked there for quite a long time, for about a decade, for BP, the oil company, and BP is quite a big oil and gas trader. So I ended up on their trading floors via internal program. Loved it. I'm like, I'm staying here. This part of business, that's me. The vibe, the challenge, the buzz of it, and so on. And then from there, I went into which happens a lot in the physical trading business. Then from there, I ended up at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan doing similar jobs, but more on what's called the derivative side. So basically, here you would say I've spent a lot of my time in Wall Street. In London, we say in the city, but it's the equivalent. And then including similar jobs, then in the last one I did was for Centrica, which is a big utility in the UK and with global reach as well. It's a big gas buyer, for example. So I was looking after that. Equivalent would be here in the US would be Florida Light Power or one of those style companies. So in a way, my background has been seeing the different parts of what actually MiQ is doing, where you need the financial side of things, the tradability of it, but also how does the operator side of things work and what does the buyer need, which was my last experience. But yes, I did. Then after that, I retired. I needed to go skiing. I needed to go windsurfing. I needed to go mountain biking. Yeah. So I didn't want to be too old for doing much more of that. But yeah, then a former colleague of mine, she called me, and 4 years later, I had no intention coming back. The only reason she convinced me was like, because this is a very different objective, and it's yes, I'm working, but actually it's more my hobby, my passion to do this. So I'm loving every day of it.
So did you found MiQ, or were you brought in kind of after the idea was already settled?
The idea was there, but
okay.
not settled at all. Was like not even a piece of paper when I joined.
Okay,
but it was like we might need to do a thing called certification.
So, yeah. So walk me through kind of like maybe what the original thinking was, and then how it evolves. Things change so quickly in the beginning stages of something, trying to you're manifesting,
trying to gel it.
Yeah. It's like what is the kind of like this mechanism? So like why did you guys settle upon certification? There's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and it's like in sustainability lands, it's called the theories of change.
Yeah,
and so you do see a lot of other NGOs, for example, or advocacy groups that will say, no, we need to get regulation is the way forward, and so they will do a lot of advocacy to change the regulation, and it's one theory of change. Other theories of change is let's go and protest. That's another theory of change. So how do you want to bring along that change? Our theory of change is that the markets are efficient, and that specifically in methane, what is lacking to kind of create this abatement is the information. Because methane leaks, it's like hundreds of leaks left and right and center at the operator's level. And the question here is like, it literally comes down to how long is a piece of string? What's the exact measure that is good, less good, better? And so with certification, what we bring in is, okay, here are your yardsticks, your KPIs, your metrics, and now go away and trade on it, transact on it, invest on this, which is bread and butter in the industry. That's how the oil and gas industry operates, because if they have a metric or a benchmark to compete with, they will. That's how this works. So our theory of change came very much from that. We need to create a market. And again, based on precedents such as we've seen in renewable electricity. And so this was a coming together of Rocky Mountain Institute in Boulder, together with Systemic, which is an environmental consultancy in London. And that's where the idea started. And very early on, they contacted me, and we need somebody with all that experience to set this up. And then, we decided to call that MiQ to operationalize this, because the operationalizing part is key here. It can't just stay in what I call an ivory tower, a piece of paper on a website that's like interesting, but how do we do this in the reality? And that's kind of where we are now. So the first live certifications was only early 22, maybe late 21. So two and a bit years in now. So it was zero before that. EQT was one of the first ones, and Exxon joined on one of their facilities as well. Since then, BP has done all their facilities, Repsol, Northeast, and several independent as well, Penn Energy, for example. And so now we've reached, in 2 years and a bit, the stage where we are certifying more than 20% of US gas, which is an enormous quantity.
Mm-hmm. Especially in 2.5 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and we're very pleased to see that, because it means companies are picking this up. That competition is starting. And the next stage is to bring this with those companies to the buyers. So yeah, that's kind of roughly in a summary.
So I'm curious, like with EQT being one of the first, obviously want to be the largest natural gas producer in the US.
Yep.
What was the pitch to them when there was, this was just an idea, it wasn't commercialized yet. How was this original concept received?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting you say that, because originally it was a concept, and still now, when we go and speak to people outside of the US, they say, well, what are people doing outside of the US? Now our answer is, well, it's working in the US. Yes, your facility might be slightly different than the one in the US, but that doesn't matter. And so the first ones, like any starting markets, is kind of complicated. But I think the concept appealed to people because there was a realization happening then that you need an independent to state what the methane emissions are of a facility or of a company. You can't, and in the past it was the companies themselves who did their own reporting, and including the EPA reporting in the US, that is also one's own number. But the realization was that society doesn't necessarily follow that anymore. And that's before you go into, okay, methane emissions, there are lots of different methodologies. Which ones is it? And then one is comparing apples to oranges to mandarins and whichever ones. So that's where MIQ kind of provided that kind of yardstick, that framework. And because I think some of the companies like EQT who've got low methane emissions, then they can come out confidently, well, MIQ has done the audit, MIQ has certified this, so this is correct. And I think that helps those companies to prove their credentials to their buyers, to their stakeholders. And then where we are coming from, that then drives others to have to follow.
Yeah.
And so it is very much what we're looking for, is these tipping points. And I think in the United States, we've had the first one clearly, as we've now certifying 20% of gas.
I'm really curious. I mean, that's over 20% certified in the US in 2.5 years, how you were able to build such trust and rapport in an environment where so we've already established that everybody's talking about it, everybody's thinking about it, but if you peel back one level below upper management and you get into where the rubber meets the road of actually doing it, you know, talk to all these different technology providers, talk to all these different EMPs, and it's like everybody has this question of like, what is the emissions tech stack of all these various technologies that you need to accomplish all the things that you're talking about, right? Walk me through your methodology on like, kind of give me a high level of like this certification, right? So you said this is a grade like A through F. Okay. Yep. So A through F. And how do you guys go out and give these grades and these certifications?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. There are many opinions on, is the flyover from so-and-so company better than the handheld camera from so-and-so company? Or, hey, satellites will just see it anyway. So there's a lot of debate happening in there. The approach we have taken is we are creating the framework. So obviously we're not selling the technology. That would be a conflict if we were to. But also we want that market to work. There's many fast-growing companies in the US doing methane detection and monitoring and measuring technology. So what we are doing, we're setting the standards. To get that A grade, one needs to do, for example, 4 times a year, a flyover of 25 kilos per hour of detection level. Now, that's what we've written in the standard. Equally, one might have a company that says, well, actually, what if I do this 12 times a year, but with a detection limit of 50 kilos? Because I've got this other provider and that's what they can do and it's cheaper, for example, and that's the one I prefer to work with, or it works better in my area, for argument's sake. What we've then created is equivalency tests. So whereby different technologies can be allowed, but you have to prove to basically the auditor via the standard that technology gives the similar qualitatively results. And so we are what's called technology agnostic. And it's deliberate, because what I want to do is for this to grow fast. And for this to grow fast, it needs to be scalable. It needs to be hyper scalable, basically. And hyper scalability means that I don't want to spend my time trying to build the right technology, which might be the wrong technology in 2 years anyway. There's an ecosystem out there of technology providers. Equally, we don't do the audit. That's a third party. There are auditors out there. We will accredit them. So we will say that prove that auditor is good, but it means we can grow much faster. I don't have to create a whole team of auditors. So, and also I don't want to run a company of that many people anyway. But we kind of create the glue, if you want to, and then people work around that. So it's not only from a credibility perspective that is key, because it means there are no conflicts. The other advantage is this can scale, because there are, give or take these days, we work with about 30 of these technology providers. We've built up as well a dozen plus audit firms that we work with. That's not us. They scale. Yeah. And so, again, coming back to, we want the markets to work. We create the glue for the markets to work, and that's where we stop, for example.
One of the things you mentioned, there have been other groups who've come into the space who are certifying things, but they were also providing the technology.
Yep.
A little bit of a conflict,
I think so,
in my opinion, and opinion of a lot of other people. And so it's good to hear that you guys are technology agnostic.
Totally.
I did have a chance to go to y'all's website prior and kind of see all the technology providers. Very familiar with pretty much the entire list. So it's awesome that you're working with all the best people that are out there.
Yeah, and there's some really good people in there. I had and about 3 years ago, I visited one of them, and I still remember it was quite an innovative technology, and was in their offices, which was more like, oh, this is skunkworks. It's like a bunch of engineers tinkering away, and I was like, well, this is super exciting. And this company since then has done, I think, their first or the second fundraising, so they're all growing. And it's almost like, yep, we're not going to have a favorite child here. I'm going to be clear, because we're technology agnostic, but it's great to see these companies growing. And I'm going to say this as a European, the vast majority of them are US based. That's where the innovation is taking place. Now, there are some companies as well in other spaces, but I also think this is an opportunity. This is a space that's going to grow. I can see the innovation from a markets perspective, from a technology perspective, is taking place here. And I think that's going to create opportunities on a global scale, because it's a global problem. So even if where I'm coming from, and you asked me the exact percentage on the US, which I probably should know, but I can't remember it, is I'm not interested in just solving the US, because that percentage is too low for the real problem, which is everywhere. Yeah. So we need this ubiquitous technology, this underlying framework that everybody just understands. Where I want to end up is people don't think about this anymore. Yeah. Just like, I don't know when this debate happened in production, when people were debating health and safety measures. There must have been a moment in history when, do we put on the hard hat or not? And what is it, Caterpillar shoes working on the rigs. Yeah. I don't know when that happened, but it must have been a tough debate at the time. Nobody thinks about that anymore. You just put on the hard hat. And so I want to end up in a world where, well, one just certifies, one starts to lower the emissions. A buyer will just want that information. It's just part of doing business.
Yeah. On the certifications, on the grades, how did you come up with the initial standards? Right? Like how do you determine what is, like, how do you determine the difference between an A and a C?
Yeah. Well, that's a very thoughtful question. I need to try to dig into my memory there a bit. So what we did do a lot of studies around what's already available. So there were a lot of scientific.
So kind of probably what's feasible with existing technology,
and what is too difficult potentially with existing technology. So we do have, there's 3 pillars in total in the standards. So it's quite holistic from that perspective. So the first pillar is around what's called an inventory, which is based upon, okay, how many valves, where are they? What's the typical leak of such a valve? It's called emission factors approach. Do that properly, because in many cases it's not done properly, which is why the audit is key to do that properly. Then the second part is around, okay, we all know those numbers are not precise enough, but it's a starting point. Then the second one is on the technologies. And so that's where we then set these norms, like, for example, on the A grade, it's different than the B grade and so on. But then we also have a third part, because we realized when we designed it, even with those 2 combined, it might not be enough to get sufficient confidence in the data. So there's a third part, and that's called the company practices. And we will rank the companies on how they apply, for example, LDAR, it's called leak detection and repair programs. How fast do they repair their leaks? How do they deal with tank unloading? Do they even discuss methane in their management meetings? And depending on where they are, and all of this is very precisely coded. And that's actually key in our standard. It is coded, all this. Because if you involve an auditor, it needs to be precise. It can't just be like, let's just see where they end up. No. The difference between A grade and a B grade and a C grade is very crystal clear in the standard. The standard being, just to be clear on that, that's a 100-page document. It's on our website, but the auditors use that to determine, is this an A or a B? And so we bring those three elements together. Each of them, there's a point system against them. And then it might be, for example, that on pillar 1 and 2, you have a C grade and a C grade. And on pillar 3, it's a D grade. That will be a D grade overall. Okay? But the company knows precisely what they need to go to get that part to a C grade. They also know what they need to go from a C to a B. And so what we're discovering almost is that our standard and the protocols and the fact of going through the audits helps companies to improve. It's like a blueprint. What do I need to do next? Yeah. And it becomes clearly that we want people to compete to go towards A grades.
Yeah.
But that's what the oil industry is used to, because I don't know, I was also in the refining space at the time. And are we first quartile or are we second quartile? And it's like, we need to be in first quartile. That's how decisions get made in management. Yeah. And so it's a bit the same. Give people that kind of comparison benchmark. Numbers work, basically.
So is an A grade today, the standards of that, the exact same as an A grade 12 months from now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the goalposts are not going to move.
No, I don't know, because I mean, an A grade is okay. If I purely bring it down to the essence now of what's the methane intensity. So it might be that some of the technology tweaks are changing over time as maybe technology becomes more available or cheaper. So that, you know what, maybe in 3 years we say it's really cheap and might as well do this 12 times a year rather than 4 times a year. But we are not even thinking that through, to be honest. Yeah. The key is ultimately the grades. Because what happens as well, when the seller transacts the gas with the buyer, the information of the methane emissions is printed on there per certificates. So for a top of my memory, I think the C grade is 37-ish grams per MMBTU. So 37 grams of leaks per MMBTU produced of gas. So that information is on there, okay? So, and expressed back again into percentages, that C grade is 0.2%. To put that in perspective, that's for production. In perspective, the average in the US, and we've done studies on this with a company called Kairos and Highwood, done flyovers, so it is in measurement informed, what we call, is 1.0%. So a C grade is amazing. It is 1/5 of the average of the United States. An A grade is at 0.05%. That is 20 times better. So coming back to what I said earlier, we think we can solve 70 or 80% by the end of this decade. And then the big picture is, we've dealt with this, is the average of the world and the US, and some of these numbers are a tiny bit up for grabs, somewhere above 2%, let's call it, okay? So if we get the upstream people to below 0.2%, that's pretty good. We're done. So by the time you're an A grade, it's near zero, definitely. So honestly, I am not going to care about, that should be 0.01%. It's like rounding errors now.
Yeah.
And I know opinions might be different on that, but I'm looking at the bigger picture. I want to go from 2% to 0.2% and to maybe lower.
Yeah.
That's the bigger picture that we need to go to.
So let's talk about how this is being received in the market, right? So I'm an operator, my gas is certified. What is obviously outside of feeling like we're doing the right thing, are we getting more for our gas than we would naturally? And if so, do you have any numbers around that? So
we're seeing several consequences. So first of all, this is early start of the market, and we've ramped up massively the certified gas to this 20% of US gas supply. Is that there are several effects that the companies are seeing. Is one, in some cases we're even seeing, and this is with companies where there's private lending involved, is they can now go to their banks and say, look, I'm certified. Somebody else is saying I'm low methane. So what we're seeing is the financials and insurance companies are starting to appreciate that. And that's a message that we also...
Are they getting a break on insurance premiums?
Sorry?
Or do they get a break on insurance premiums? As a result, maybe?
I think that's where it should go.
Okay.
So But it might go there, or it might be that, well, if you have not got methane of a certain level, then I'm actually not lending you anymore, or then I'm not sure if. Yeah. So those conversations are taking place, I think. And then the second effect is the premium on the gas. From what we are hearing is anywhere between 1 cent and 5 cents. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, there is at the moment quite a lot of certified gas available. And the buyers, they are learning about this concept, because first we had to build the concept of certified gas. Now we're in the stage of educating the buyers. Mm. And the buyers, that includes the utilities, that includes via the utilities, the PUCs, that includes the large buyers. That's going to be quite soon the ammonia producers, for example, fertilizers producers. And then the last one, which is also key for the US, is the LNG exporters. Mm. And so what we're now seeing, and this is suddenly turning around this year, I'm seeing a lot of LNG demand, for example, coming back on wanting to understand these numbers. I think that had disappeared a bit. We were slightly disappointed with that over the last 2 years. But you have to see it in the context of the war with Russia. The Europeans and the rest of the world were scrambling for gas, any price. Yeah. And that's calmed down now. That war is still ongoing, unfortunately. But the supply situation is clearly calmed down. Gas prices are back to normal. And I can see the Europeans saying, I need to know the emissions of my gas. And actually, I don't want to buy the average emissions. I want to buy the much lower emissions. Yeah. So it's a market that's going through phases. I don't know. One could say we're in the iPhone 1 something, maybe 2 phase. That doesn't mean the whole market is adopting this yet. So these stages will happen.
Are you seeing more traction with public companies versus private companies, due to hopefully seeing possibly some ROI and the appreciation of the stock price?
Are you meaning on the operator side or on the
operator side? Yeah,
I think we've got a bit. I mean, we've got a spread amongst the operators that we're working with. It's different drivers, that's for sure. So I think on the private ones, it's more the banking relations, those kind of levers, and then we're seeing private equities who also just want to start doing this. This is where the world is going. With the public companies, I think it's slightly different drivers because they're more exposed, for example. And then we're seeing different drivers between, for example, the large branded IOCs, international oil companies, and the large producers, which are not as consumer branded. So there's slightly different drivers. But ultimately, I think what's also happened last year, and this is very different from when I started this in 2019, we had to talk a lot about methane. Why methane? What is methane? Explaining methane. We don't have to do that as much anymore. So methane is now part of the narrative. We need to address methane, and oil and gas is one of the most logical ones. It's where we can get the most effect. Because the other effects of methane are in agriculture. That's going to be a longer road probably, and landfills.
So now that we understand the incentive on the seller side, what's the incentive on the buyer side to come in, pay this premium for the certified gas?
I think on the buyer side, it's first of all, currently they don't know the emissions of the gas they're buying. Without certified gas and the actual information attached via the certificate scheme, they're almost shooting in the dark. And so the best estimate is the average. And in the US, that's high. And in many other countries, that's a high number as well. So going to specific language, what scope 1 emissions for the operator is for the buyer, their scope 3 emissions. It's part of what's happening upstream. And so far, they've all been doing the accounting for CO2, which is relatively straightforward to calculate, but not for methane. Coming back, you need a methodology. And so that's what we've introduced. So that is one effect, is at least having a number. And then secondly, where the market is now, that A or B or C rated gas in the United States, that is lower than the averages. And so buyers, gas utilities, fertilizers, they have different choices to make of how they're working towards their net zero targets, however they have defined these. And so they use concepts such as, I don't know, RNG, for example. Some use carbon offsets. And now we're also talking about certified gas, for example, because the bang for buck, to be honest, on certified gas is actually quite good. And I'm comparing 3 different concepts. They've each got, in sustainability land, different terminologies and effects and so on. Probably way beyond this here. But that's how buyers look at it. Other possibilities are I'm going to electrify, or I'm going to install windmills instead of burning gas in my power stations. So they have a lot of possibilities to look at. And so certified gas is now another lever they can pull. But the nice thing about certified gas, they can do this at scale. Because the effect because of this multiplier effect of the 82 times, when you run the calculations, and there is no limitation on, or at least currently, on the quantum of gas one can do. Let's say you buy 100 in volume of gas per year. If you want to buy RNG against that, you're going to be limited to a couple of percent because we can't produce enough of this. It's always going to be smallish volumes across a system. Certified gas, you can buy all your volume because that's lowering the methane emissions in gas, which the oil producers can do. And anyway, 20% is there already. So again, the impact of certified gas can be very high. And then there's another important point is that when you buy certified gas, you're not the upstream emissions are not being or lower emitted versus the other concept is afterwards, you could also offset. But offsetting is qualitatively not as good as avoiding the emissions. And so that gives a lot of potential for the buyers. And that's what we're looking forward to pick up over the coming years.
So on the offset side, having had a lot of conversations there, and I know it's evolving, and so things may have changed in the last 6 months, but for quite some time, whenever you're buying offsets, essentially what you were getting was an email with attachments of PDFs saying this is your offset. It wasn't. It hasn't historically been a fluid marketplace where it's like you're certain. It's like almost like there's like no security in that, and it could just be like this whole fraudulent offset market, right? Whenever you're actually buying certified natural gas, what are you getting? Yeah,
I say it's a good. I mean, it's one. I traded some carbon offsets in my previous life, and I wasn't necessarily a big fan on some of the complexities involved around that and on the opaqueness of some of it. And so with the MiQ design, we've gone to the way this needs to be very clear to people. Where do they find the information? It needs to be trustworthy. Otherwise, the whole system will just fall down. So you raise a very good point. So for that purpose, we have a concept called a digital registry. And the way it works is that, let's say an operator, EQT, for example, sells certified gas to whichever utility in the US. They both have accounts within that system, and the certificates will go from EQT to buyer XYZ. Buyer XYZ then comes to us and says, hey, yeah, I'm going to use this. I'm going to claim it, it's called. Because, hey, I've got consumption here. Those certificates will then be cancelled, disappear from the registry. And so the loop is closed. They can't be used again anymore. And so that's also why we've standardized this with an A, a B, a C, a D rating, rather than different kind of measures and it making too complex. So yes, qualitatively there could, and we don't want, so some people might say, oh, I want to buy the, I'm just going to use EQT now again. The EQT A-rated gas versus, I don't know, BP's A-rated gas. It's the same. It's A-rated.
Yeah.
And so it is that is the key of this design. So, because otherwise the traders and the commercial people won't pick this up. If you look at financial markets, you need that fungibility, just like oil trading or Henry Hub trading. Everybody knows what Henry Hub is, because that's the midpoint where you trade, and then you trade spreads from there onwards. So for us, it's a bit the same. You need to have an A grade, a B grade, and then everybody will just get on with it and forget about it. They will, and that's where I want this to get to, that the buyer will know what a B grade means, and the seller will know, the trader in between, the marketer in between, and then it becomes part of daily life. Yeah. Because the key is that the decision-making for buying gas sits with traders and commercial people. It does not sit reading a yearly report of an ESG report. There are no consequences of that. So we want to bring that information to the actual decision makers.
Yep.
So that they push that or they offer it, and then the markets will do their work.
So you're 2.5 years in. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What is your hope?
Well, I'm going to retire again by then. That's for sure. But yeah, 2030 is our target, that we want to have the vast majority of this running on the global scale. And And I'm still very, not just optimistic, I think realistic. I'm Dutch, we're realistic people. That's just how we operate. That this is going to happen because of, again, the availability of the technology and so on. And companies are picking this up. So we want to have this embedded in LNG trading systems, for example. A cargo gets delivered somewhere in the world, boom, people deliver the certificates with it, don't even think about it anymore. Decisions get made on what's called methane intensity or carbon intensity on a daily basis everywhere globally. I think there will be some pockets on a global basis where it might not get to a traded markets. And now we're talking about quirky countries such as, I don't know, the middle of Kazakhstan, for example, because that gas stays locally, or some parts of Russia. And I think there our theory of change is that if we do this in the parts of the globe where there's enough trading and so enough pressure happening, that actually it lowers the access to technology. And so over time, because of technology transfer, it just happens in an industry like oil and gas, it will happen there anyway. Because by the time they want to replace their valve because it's broken, they're going to have to buy the new model of the valve, which takes this all into account, because that's been the pressure in the more advanced tradable markets.
I love it. You guys have a lot of partners, like we already talked about. If there's any other technology providers out there that have something really neat, super cutting edge, how do they work with you guys?
They come to us basically, and I mean, we sometimes have the problem not to go too geeky and to kind of get too interested in this, but we love it. There are lots of, on a monthly basis, we get at least 1, 2, 3 new companies coming our way. There's a lot of innovation happening in this space, which we totally encourage for that to continue, because I think that's the key, that keeps happening. Where we are now is not necessarily where we're going to be in 5 years. And that debate in technology is taking place. And it was a debate, I think, a couple of years ago where some technology, and obviously logical technology companies will do their pitch on which technology. And I think that got a bit too stuck in this type of technology is the only solution. No, it isn't. There is no silver bullet. And quite often what we see in some of the certifications are like 3, 4, 5 different types of technology involved and need to be combined. And technology might be different if there are mountains, or there's lots of trees, or it's too hot, or there's snow, or you're on the water or not on the water. A lot of wind, not a lot of wind. Yeah. So you need different technologies. And I think that's where this will keep evolving. And then, a big question mark hangs around, for example, in my view as well, for example, on satellites. There's more and more of satellites being launched.
John Arnold had that new technology that he was talking about on Twitter that is like super, super accurate satellites.
Sorry, say again?
John Arnold has this new technology that I think he invested in, potentially.
Okay.
It is like, it's supposed to be the most accurate satellite technology that we've seen to date. And so there was like, he had a thread about it on Twitter that went viral.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I hope that it'd be great if it gets there. From what we're seeing currently is that the satellites are not precise enough to do this properly. The levels that we need to do the proper detecting. And actually, it's not just coming up with a number. That by itself is one thing, but it's also where are the leaks so that they can be repaired, or the valves can be replaced, or compressors being replaced, and so on. And from what we can see, that needs still a lot of flyovers, hands, lasers, and so on the ground. Or so I think the satellites are going to be very useful to kind of catch the big emitters. It's what's called super emitters. It's going to be very useful at that, do general surveys. But once you go into the details, you need a lot of these other technologies.
Yep.
But who knows, in 10 years, this might be so precise that fine, the satellite is good enough.
With as fast as technology is evolving, I would never say never on anything anymore.
So I won't predict on that one either. No.
You know, we need certified. This is random. We need certified sushi. We've got
certified sushi.
We need certified sushi. We need A-grade sushi. There's like 5 places in Houston that are A-grade sushi, in my opinion. And
okay.
I've got my own little scale.
Yeah.
And then all the way down to there's a lot of Fs.
I mean, we can probably develop that as MiQ, but
we could probably make
as a bit of a sideshow then.
George, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
What's the website? MiQ.com?
MiQ.org.
MiQ.org.
Yep.
Go check it out, guys. If you like this episode, go leave us a rating review. Share this with your friends. Catch you guys in the next episode.